Hare Krishna. Our heart is always filled with the desires for sense gratification, and mind keeps on constantly planning that how to actualize those material desires. And we assume that our senses are subservient to us, and it is our duty to provide them what they want. So we are always putting in our best efforts to satisfy our gross senses like eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin, and also to our subtle senses which comprises of mind, intelligence and false ego. So eyes, we know that eyes always want to see beautiful forms. Similarly, ears want to hear different melodies, and nose wants to smell something which is nice. Tongue is always crazy for palatable food, and our skin, that is our skin, it always longs for sensual touch. Not just that, even our subtle senses always are like desirous for gratification, and we think that as masters of our senses we should give best joy to our senses, and we hope that by doing so we will be experiencing happiness. But the reality is that we are not the masters of our senses, but in fact we are under the control of our senses. And so if we refuse to obey our senses, then our senses make us go crazy. Just try to analyze your life, and you will find that 24 hours in a day you and me are busy in acting as per the dictate of our senses. We think that by gratifying our senses we can be happy in this world, but this is never going to happen. This is confirmed by none other than Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He says to Arjuna that those who live only to gratify their senses lead a sinful and unhappy life. In Bhagavad Gita, verse number 16 of the 3rd chapter, Krishna is saying, Evam pravartitam chakram nanu vartaya tihaya agayor indriya ramo mogham partha sa jivati. So what Krishna is saying to Arjuna here? He says, my dear Arjun, one who does not follow in human life the cycle of sacrifice thus established by the Vedas certainly leads a life full of sin. And Krishna is further saying, living only for the satisfaction of the senses, such a person lives in vain. These are the words of Krishna, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if you want to lead a peaceful life, if you want to lead a beautiful life, so it is very important, it is imperative that we have to take charge of our senses. But it is important to understand that our senses also cannot be inert, and our heart can never be free of desires. Currently the situation is that our heart is impregnated with worldly desires, and our senses, all our senses are always busy in satisfying those desires of our heart. And because of because of our material contamination or material desires, our heart is always filled with different vices, and this is the reason that we suffer externally also, and most importantly we suffer internally. So if you want to get freedom from these unwanted sufferings, then the important thing is that we need to have desires, but those desires should not be material desires, but we should have proper desires. And when we have those desires, then it is also important that we also give some kind of engagement to our senses, because we have to understand that our senses can never be inert. So if you try to understand this, then let us understand it through an example of a jasmine flower. So just as a jasmine flower cannot give up its fragrance, similarly we, the living entities, cannot give up our desires. So we need to carefully analyze the desires which gives us pleasure, the desires which gives us pain. So engaging the senses to satisfy material desires rarely gives us any pleasure. And the dollops of happiness, the small amount of happiness which we experience in this world by material means, it is always accompanied with the anxiety that we may lose it at any moment. So the great sages, the wise men, they always advise us that we should not get bogged down by pain producing material desires. Instead, what they advise us? They advise us that we should blossom our heart with spiritual desires, which produces pleasure, which are uncontaminated, unlimited, and most importantly, those are not ephemeral. That is, those are not temporary. So Krishna wanted to teach an important lesson to us, that how our heart should always be filled with spiritual desires. So what Krishna did, he appeared as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he taught us the necessity of giving up material desires, and how it is important and how it is required for us that we should be pursuing spiritual desires with strong determination. So he educated us by his own example. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he was known as Nimai previously, and he was recognized as a very, very great scholar. And in his personal life, he had a very wonderful, dedicated, extraordinarily beautiful wife, and he had an extremely loving mother. But in spite of all this, he gave up all these worldly pleasures voluntarily. Instead, what he did, he donned a sannyasi robe at a young age. And why did he do so? Because he wanted to teach everyone, he wanted to teach the world that how one should perfect one's human life by sincerely giving up material desires and engaging the senses in the service of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And if we read Chaitanya Charitamrita, if we read the different biographies of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we find that how his disciples also followed the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For example, his two important disciples, Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, so they also had lots of wealth, they had power, they had prestige, but they also gave up everything and they got completely engaged in the service of Krishna 24 hours a day. And similarly, in present time, if we see, then we can also learn an important lesson from the life of Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada also, he dedicated his complete life in fulfilling the desire of his spiritual master. So Prabhupada's spiritual master, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, wanted that he broadcast the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu all over the world. And Srila Prabhupada accomplished this desire of his spiritual master with flying colors. And his journey wasn't smooth, but in spite of all the obstacles, he continued with grit, with determination, with a strong faith in Krishna's protection. As of now, we think that how can we be happy if we give up our material desires? Because as of now, we do not have any experience that how we can be happy just by having spiritual desires in our heart. But one experience we all have, that no matter how best we try, but these worldly desires, these material desires are never going to satiate our heart. This each and every one of us have the experience. And if we know that how spiritual, and if you want to understand that how spiritual desires can satisfy our heart, then we can read the life of great devotees. And because we see that pure devotees, they always remain blissful just by having spiritual desires in their heart, just by serving Krishna 24 hours a day. So if you want to replace material desires, so replacing it becomes easy when we replace our lower spiritual desires with you can say higher spiritual desires. Even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that lower taste can be given up only by higher taste. And once the taste for spiritual life, it fructifies in our heart, then we will definitely lose all attraction for the worldly desires. Now in this world, one of the greatest desires is the desire to enjoy with the opposite sex. Most unfortunate thing. But even this can be given up. Even this strong desire which is binding us to this world and giving us lots and lots of pain, this can also be given up easily if our heart gets attracted to the lotus feet of Krishna. So there is a very beautiful story related to this. So there was a person whose name was Dhanur Das. So he somehow or the other, he was attracted to a particular lady, and especially he was attracted to the two beautiful eyes of the lady, and he would continuously gaze at the two eyes of the lady, and he would think that these two eyes are the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in this world. So Ramanujacharya, a great Vaishnava saint, so he saw the plight of Dhanurdas and he felt pity on him. So he wanted to change his consciousness, he wanted to uplift his consciousness. So once what happened that Ramanujacharya somehow or the other called Dhanurdas and he showed him the eyes of Lord Ranganath. And when Dhanurdas, when he saw the eyes of Lord Ranganath, then he was wonderstruck. He could not believe that something can be so beautiful in this world. He was completely mesmerized by the lotus-like eyes of the wonderful and beautiful Lord Ranganath. And just by taking darshan, just by seeing the eyes of Lord Ranganath, he lost all attraction for all the mundane things of this world. In fact, he was attracted to that beautiful, so-called beautiful eyes of the lady. So he lost that attraction also. It's not that he started hating the lady, but he understood that this material, whatever the attraction may be, those attractions are not permanent, and most importantly, those are not as beautiful as the beauty of the Supreme Lord, or the happiness one gets when one takes darshan of the Supreme Lord and serves the Supreme Lord. So one of the great sages, Yamunacharya, he also says, Yamunacharya was the spiritual master of Ramanujacharya. So he says in this beautiful words, he explains, since I have been engaged in the transcendental loving service of Krishna, realizing ever new pleasure in him. Whenever I think of sex pleasure, I spit at the thought and my lips curl with distaste. This is the words of Yamunacharya, a great devotee of the Lord. So for our own good, we should focus on cultivating spiritual desires. But while doing so, we will be troubled by material desires, because unless we become completely purified, such lower desires will keep on knocking at our door again and again, knocking at the door of our heart again and again. But in spite of those things, we should not succumb to material desires. And Krishna gives a very important lesson or advice that how we can deal with those material desires. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Apurya manam achala pratistham samudram apa pravisthanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve sa santim apnoti na kama kami. So what is the meaning of this verse? So Krishna is saying a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy those desires. So although the desires may be knocking at our heart, but what we should do, we should not make endeavor, we should not make plan to satisfy those desires. Even in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, chapter 15, text 22, it is mentioned that if we make plans with determination, then we will be able to ultimately give up our lusty desires for sense gratification, if we make plans with determination. And simultaneously, what we should be doing, we should plan to flood our heart with Krishna conscious desires. In fact, just the desire to serve Krishna will fill our heart with joy. So both the things we should be doing. One thing is that when material desires start coming, then we should just tolerate it. We should not try to fulfill those material desires. And parallelly, what we should be doing, we should also try to cultivate spiritual desires. Now again, we will refer the verse of chapter 2 and text number 71 of Bhagavad Gita, and there we see that what Krishna is saying. Krishna in this particular verse, he is saying that Vihaya kamanyah sarvan pumamscharati nispraha nirmamo nira ahankara sa santim adigachati. So Krishna is saying a person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he is the person who can attain real peace. So what Krishna is saying, that one who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from all desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship, and who is devoid of false ego. So this fourth thing Krishna is saying. So if we are able to attain that state, then we can attain complete peace, which we are always looking for. So Krishna is giving us the formula. So now it is not just important to have the right desires. To have right desires is very important, but it is also equally important that we should engage our senses in fulfilling those desires, because we should not like sit idle or be inert. Because if we study the life of pure devotees, we will see that their desire to serve the Lord did not just remain dormant in their heart, but they worked tirelessly to serve the desire of the Lord. For example, Hanuman was always busy in serving the wishes of Lord Ram to the best of his ability, and we know what is the ability of Hanumanji. He has humongous ability. So we see that he has done many wonderful things for Lord Ram. Similarly, Rup Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, they were so busy in their devotional service that they hardly had any time to sleep or any time to eat any food. They would be thoroughly occupied in writing like transcendental books they wrote to glorify the Lord, to glorify the devotional service, to glorify the devotees. And along with that, they also revealed those places, those glorious places in Vrindavan where Krishna performed his memorable pastimes. And they also constructed gorgeous temples and installed like beautiful deities, so that people like us can go there and release the nectar of devotional life. And we see that the two brothers, Rup Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, so they were fortunate because they were personally instructed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and every moment of the day, and what to talk about the day, every moment of the day, every moment of the night, they would be always busy in Krishna consciousness. They would be always inspiring people to practice devotion to Krishna. And similarly, Srila Prabhupada, he also followed the 40 steps of Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami. He also dedicated his life in distributing the transcendental message of Krishna all over the world. And Prabhupada also built magnificent temples in different cities of the world. And one of the most important spiritual service which Srila Prabhupada did was that he introduced the famous Rath Yatra festival outside India. And he also wrote like scores of transcendental literatures, which people all over the world, people are reading, people like us are reading, and somehow or the other we are also trying to understand the spiritual subject matters, and we can, so that we can also transform our life. So like these liberated souls, we the conditioned souls should also not be idle, but we should also engage all our senses in worshipping and serving the Supreme Lord. Because if we do so, we will be able to give up all desires for sense gratification, and then we will be always be engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. And when we are doing so, then our heart will also get cleansed of all the impurities like lust, anger and greed. And lust, anger and greed is described as gateway to hell by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. So just like toxins, when the toxins are there in the body, and when the toxins are flushed out from the body, then the body feels light, we feel healthy. Similarly, the toxic desires, as soon as these toxic desires get flushed out from the heart and the senses stops craving for those toxic desires, we will also start feeling light, healthy, peaceful, and most importantly happy. So once our heart is free from the desire for sense gratification, we will be experiencing continuous joy like the pure devotees of Krishna always experiences. And in that purified state, what is going to happen? That our eyes will enjoy seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, ear will always relish the glories of the Lord, and our mouth, our tongue will continuously chant the names of Lord, and all our bodies like hand, legs, everything, all our senses will be always blissfully engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. So Rupa Goswami shares his experience, shares his joy, which he experiences when he narrates that what extraordinary experience he gets when he chants the beautiful names of Krishna. So Rupa Goswami is saying, Tunde tandavine ratim vitanute tundavali labdhaye karna krodha kadambini ghatayate karnar budhe bhaya sthiram cheta prangana sangini vijayate sarvendriyanam pritim no jane janita kiyadibhir amrite krishneti varnadvai. So what Rupa Goswami is saying in this verse? He says, I do not know how much nectar the two syllables Krishna have produced. When the holy name of Krishna is chanted, it appears to dance within the mouth. We then desire many mouths. When that name enters the holes of the ears, we desire many millions of ears. And when the holy name dances in the courtyard of the heart, it conquers the activities of the mind, and therefore all the senses become inert. So this is the great experience which Rupa Goswami is having when he chants the name of Krishna. So if we also engage our senses in Krishna consciousness, we will slowly begin realizing that if senses are pursuing material desires, we become miserable. But if senses are busy in the service of Krishna, then we feel contented, we feel happy. And by the grace of Krishna, a day will come when we will be able to give up all our desires for sense gratification and attain freedom from all miseries, freedom from all sufferings. And in that state, our heart will no longer carry the burden of material desires. And unfortunately, even if any worldly desire knocks at our heart, then we will simply ignore it. So by engaging the senses in always serving the lotus feet of the Lord, which is compared to wish-fulfilling trees, we will taste the nectar of love of Krishna and we will remain eternally happy. Hare Krishna.